Enron, we're making billions, just don't ask how. That was Enron's business model until it all fell apart in 2001. Enron started as a boring pipeline company but transformed into an energy trading giant. They created hundreds of fake companies to hide massive losses and debts. They called these special purpose entities, fancy words for fraud. Their execs used an accounting trick called mark-to-market. This let them count future profits they expected from deals as if they'd already made the money. Imagine telling your boss you should get a bonus today for work you might do next year. When Enron couldn't hide the losses anymore, the company collapsed practically overnight. The stock plummeted from $90 to less than $1. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and retirement savings, and about $74 billion in shareholder value vanished. The most shocking part was that their accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, was shredding documents like crazy as investigators closed in. This scandal was so bad it gave us the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, changing corporate accounting rules forever. WorldCom. Just when people thought corporate fraud couldn't get worse than Enron, WorldCom said, "Hold my beer." WorldCom was America's second-largest long-distance phone company. They treated regular expenses as investments. It's like claiming your grocery bills are home improvements. When companies buy equipment that lasts many years, they can spread that cost over time. WorldCom took billions in regular expenses, like maintenance fees, and pretended they were long-term investments. This made their profits look way bigger than they really were. The fraud totaled $11 billion, the largest accounting fraud in U.S. history at that time. The company went bankrupt, 30,000 workers lost their jobs, and CEO Bernie Ebbers eventually got 25 years in prison. The truly mind-blowing part, their internal auditor found the fraud by accident while checking something completely different. One curious employee brought down a $100+ billion company. Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. I've got a special investment opportunity that consistently makes 10 to 12% returns every year, no matter what the market does. If anyone promises you this, run away, unless you enjoy being scammed like Bernie Madoff's victims. Madoff ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history, $64.8 billion worth. A Ponzi scheme works like this. The scammer uses new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors. No actual investing happens. The whole thing collapses when too many people want their money back at once. Madoff targeted wealthy individuals, charities, and Jewish community organizations. He specifically went after people who trusted him through personal connections, a tactic called affinity fraud. What's truly shocking is how long it lasted, nearly 30 years. Financial analyst Harry Markopolos figured out it was a scam and warned the SEC repeatedly starting in 2000. They ignored him for 8 years. The scheme only collapsed in 2008 when the financial crisis hit and too many investors tried to withdraw their money. Madoff got 150 years in prison. Thousands of victims lost their life savings. Many charities had to shut down completely, and his own son committed suicide from the shame. Subprime mortgage crises. Can't afford a house? No job? Terrible credit? No problem. Sign here. The housing bubble and subprime mortgage crisis wasn't just one scam. It was a layer cake of interconnected fraud that nearly destroyed the global economy. Here's how it worked. Banks gave mortgages to literally anyone, including people who couldn't possibly repay them, because they immediately sold these terrible loans to Wall Street firms who chopped them up and repackaged them as safe investments called mortgage-backed securities. Rating agencies like Moody's and S&P slapped AAA ratings, the safest possible, on these toxic investments, often without properly checking what was inside. They got paid by the very banks creating these securities, a massive conflict of interest. Meanwhile, predatory lenders targeted lower income and minority communities with deceptive loans that started with low teaser rates that later skyrocketed. Many homebuyers didn't understand the complex terms buried in the fine print. When housing prices stopped rising and people started defaulting, the whole system collapsed. About $10 trillion in lost housing value, millions of foreclosures, and a global financial crisis that cost tens of millions of jobs worldwide. The craziest part? Almost no major executives went to jail, and many banks got bailed out with taxpayer money. The banks were literally too big to fail. Standford Financial Group. Just months after Madoff's arrest, another massive Ponzi scheme collapsed. Alan Stanford promised investors incredible returns on certificates of deposit through his bank in Antigua. Stanford's scheme was worth about $7 billion and targeted people across the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He used the money to fund an insanely lavish lifestyle, private jets, a cricket team, and even a private island. What made this scam especially cruel? Stanford specifically targeted retirees and middle-class investors looking for safe investments, not just wealthy individuals like Madoff did. The SEC had suspected Stanford was running a Ponzi scheme as early as 1997, but took no action for 12 years. Stanford eventually got 110 years in prison, but most victims recovered only pennies on the dollar. Wells Fargo account fraud. Wells Fargo pulled off one of the most brazen scams in banking history. Their employees opened over 3.5 million fake accounts, credit cards, checking accounts, and other products without customers' knowledge or consent. Why did they do this? Intense pressure from management to meet unrealistic sales targets. Employees who didn't hit their numbers faced termination. Many resorted to fraud to keep their jobs. The scam went on for at least 6 years. Wells Fargo charged fees on these fake accounts and used them to boost their stock price by showing growth in new accounts. When employees tried to report the fraud through the company's ethics line, many were fired in retaliation. Wells Fargo ended up paying $3 billion in fines and settlements, and their reputation was shattered. Martin Shkreli and drug pricing. In 2015, the most hated man in America showed just how broken our pharmaceutical system is. Martin Shkreli bought the rights to Daraprim, a 62-year-old drug that treats a potentially deadly parasitic infection. Overnight, he raised the price from $13.50 to $750 per pill, a 5,000% increase. This wasn't technically illegal, just incredibly unethical. The drug costs about $1 to manufacture, but Shkreli knew that patients had no alternative. Many needed the medication to survive. Shkreli eventually went to prison, but not for price gouging. He was convicted of securities fraud in an unrelated case involving his hedge funds. The Daraprim price hike was perfectly legal under American pharmaceutical laws. The disgusting part? After all the outrage, the price of Daraprim is still over $500 per pill today. Shkreli just exposed a legal form of price gouging that continues throughout the pharmaceutical industry. 1MDB Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Imagine an entire country getting robbed by its own leader. That's what happened with Malaysia's 1MDB scandal. One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB, was supposed to be an investment fund for economic development. Instead, Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak and his associates stole at least $4.5 billion from it. Where did the money go? They bought luxury real estate, a superyacht, fine art, and even funded the Hollywood movie The Wolf of Wall Street, ironically, a film about financial fraud. Major banks like Goldman Sachs helped raise money for 1MDB, earning almost $600 million in fees while apparently ignoring red flags. Goldman later paid $2.9 billion to resolve investigations. The scam was exposed partly thanks to the extravagant lifestyle of Razak's stepson and his high-profile Hollywood connections. Najib Razak eventually got 12 years in prison, and Malaysia is still trying to recover the stolen billions. Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, claimed to have developed revolutionary blood testing technology that needed only a finger prick instead of larger blood draws. Major problem: it didn't work. Holmes raised over $700 million from investors and built Theranos into a $9 billion company on paper. She landed on magazine covers, was compared to Steve Jobs, and assembled a board of directors full of former government officials like Henry Kissinger and James Mattis. Theranos even set up blood testing centers in Walgreens stores, performing flawed tests on real patients. When their own employees raised concerns about inaccurate results, Holmes and her partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, intimidated and threatened them. The scam fell apart when Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou published an expose in 2015. Holmes was eventually convicted of fraud and sentenced to over 11 years in prison. But this wasn't just financial fraud. Theranos gave thousands of patients dangerously inaccurate medical test results that could have led to improper treatments. WireCard. These guys were supposed to be Germany's fintech success story, a payment processor worth over $28 billion that had even replaced Commerzbank on Germany's prestigious DAX 30 stock index. Just one tiny problem: $2.1 billion of their cash simply didn't exist. The company claimed this money was in Philippine bank accounts. The bank said, nope, never heard of it. For years, the Financial Times investigated WireCard's suspicious activities. Instead of taking these concerns seriously, German financial regulators investigated the journalists for market manipulation. When the fraud was finally exposed, WireCard collapsed overnight. CEO Markus Braun was arrested. COO Jan Marsalek disappeared, reportedly fleeing to Russia with the help of intelligence services. The most embarrassing part was that Ernst & Young, one of the world's big four accounting firms, had audited WireCard for a decade without spotting the fake accounts. German regulators are still trying to figure out how they missed such obvious fraud. Arechegos Capital Management. How does one guy lose $20 billion in 10 days? Just ask Bill Huang of Arechegos Capital. Arechegos wasn't technically a scam, more like a spectacular case of financial recklessness. Huang used massive amounts of borrowed money to take huge positions in a small number of stocks. The clever trick? Huang used something called total return swaps to hide how much he actually owned. Instead of buying shares directly, he made deals with multiple banks to pay him the returns on certain stocks. Each bank didn't know how much exposure other banks had given him. When some of Huang's stock bets started dropping, banks demanded more collateral. He couldn't pay, setting off a fire sale as banks dumped his positions. Viacom, CBS, and Discovery each lost over 50% of their value in days. Credit Suisse lost $5.5 billion. Nomura lost $2.9 billion. This disaster helped push Credit Suisse toward its eventual collapse in 2023. Funny enough, Huang had already been banned from trading in Hong Kong for market manipulation, yet major banks still gave him billions in credit with almost no transparency. FTX Sam Bankman-Fried's entire image was as fake as his business. FTX was supposed to be a legitimate cryptocurrency exchange. Behind the scenes, it was a mess of fraud, mismanagement, and outright theft. The scam was shockingly simple. FTX was secretly transferring customer funds to Alameda Research, SBF's trading firm. They used customer money to make risky investments, cover losses, buy luxury real estate, and make huge political donations. When cryptocurrency prices fell and customers tried to withdraw their money, FTX couldn't pay. They collapsed, owing customers over $8 billion. Until just days before collapse, SBF was celebrated as a genius and the next Warren Buffett. He appeared in ads with Tom Brady and testified before Congress as the face of responsible crypto. As technology advances, scams are evolving too. But the red flags remain the same. If returns seem too good to be true, if transparency is lacking, or if you don't fully understand the investment, your money might be funding someone else's private island. Did you enjoy this breakdown? Then please subscribe and hit that notification bell.